Hello, welcome listeners to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love hosted by Richard Osler. We're recording in the basement of our home because we're doing construction upstairs, but hopefully you won't hear that during the podcast. Anyway, my guest on today's podcast is someone I've really looked forward to have on the podcast and is overdue. He's the Chief Executive Officer at Encircle, Alex Cutini. Welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a treat. I've been listening to you and the podcast for a really long time now. So it feels like surreal to be here and listen to your voice, listening to you and looking at you, because you have a very, very particular voice that's so calming and soothing. So it feels really cool.
You're very kind, Alex. And just a little bit about Alex. He's Brazilian. He's looks younger than 40, but he's actually 40. If you know Alex, he is a convert to the LDS Church. He may talk a little bit about that. Served a mission, made his way to BYU, Idaho, as a closeted gay Latter-day Saint. Got a degree in finance and social psychology. Ended up getting a job at Goldman Sachs. He may talk a little bit about that. For the last period of time, he's been the Chief Executive Officer at Encircle. I went to the original Encircle grand opening. I just Googled that date, listeners. It was February 14th, 2017 in Provo on a cold winter, beautiful day, full of hope for queer people. Stephanie Larson and Mitch, her husband who's passed away, were there, two heroes to me, and all the people involved in that. And Encircle has really helped me as an ally. I spent a lot of time in Provo as a volunteer listening to queer people, as I was really trying to understand the space so I could better support the queer people in my life. And I love Encircle, and I'm glad that we're going to be talking about Encircle so that you can be aware of it. But Alex is going to share his story as just, a gay person growing up, just a really brave coming out story. Alex has been married to his husband, Matt, for the last 10 years. I'm glad they found each other and have been with each other for a decade. That brings a smile to my face, and I'm glad that Alex now is running Encircle and all the wonderful things that Encircle is doing, including clinical therapy. They'll talk about two 501Cs that are part of Encircle, the clinical therapy part and the other part. So many people reach out to me and are looking for resources, and Encircle, with its 5 locations along the Intermountain West, is a great resource for you, whether you're queer or love queer people or just need better support. So I'm going to turn over to Alex to share his story and talk about Encircle in any order he wants to. But so glad to have you on the podcast, Alex, and thanks in advance for doing this and all you're doing. You have really gotten involved in our community. You're all over my social media with really wonderful people throughout our community, business leaders, political leaders, religious leaders, really wonderful allies and queer people in our community. So you have done a great job networking in our community. But I'll turn it over to you, Alex.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. So a little bit about my story. I am going to be 40 in February, so 39 still.
We'll keep you 39.
Yeah, still in my 30s. But I was born in Brazil, born and raised. My whole family is in Brazil. They have actually never been to the US. I'm the only one that goes there every year to visit them. Nobody speaks English. When I was really young, I was 11 years old when I got a scholarship to learn English as a second language. I think I was in 6th grade. And there was this big firm in Brazil that wanted to support, some of the kids going to public schools that had good grades and everything and had an interest. And for some reason, I just felt really drawn to that opportunity, and I was obsessed with it, obsessed with the language. It just sounded so beautiful to me. I tell people that I lived in the US and Brazil because everything that I did, like reading, watching movies, or the music that I listened to, it was all in English because I wanted to maximize the exposure to the language. And I remember like learning the language for me was really a pivotal moment because it opened up a lot of different possibilities for me, but also like it made me interested in getting to see the world, maybe coming to the US one day. I come from a really small town, like in the middle of nowhere in Brazil. My family is not a wealthy family. My dad was a truck driver, his entire life. My mom just stayed at home taking care of the kids. I have two older sisters, and I was the youngest of three. And from an early age, growing up Catholic, because my family's not LDS, they've never been, spirituality has always been a part of my life. And I feel like when I was growing up, I just remember feeling like spirituality and religion were the same things. I don't necessarily feel that way anymore, but I just remember really latching on to religion. But what I really wanted was spirituality. And as a member of the Catholic Church, I just remember like being 13, 14, 15 on Tuesday nights, I would be going to church by myself to pray the rosary beads,
Mm-hmm.
with everybody and everybody else around me. Like they were all like 80, 85-year-old women. And I was like the 14-year-old boy, in the middle of them. But I just loved it. And I loved the rituals, the prayers, the songs, just this feeling of peace that I felt, feeling connected to something bigger than I was, right? But it was around that same time, also about 12, 13, that I just noticed being a little bit different. And obviously, I never really talked to anybody about it during that time. I just remember like an example of um, like an episode that kind of started to get me thinking like, okay, maybe I am a little bit different, was when some of my friends from school, they got a hold of like a Playboy magazine or something, and they were like showing it to each other. And I just remember feeling like those images were doing things for them
Mm-hmm.
that were not happening for me. And to be honest with you, I remember thinking, "Ooh, I really like her shoes. Her shoes look awesome." And I'm like, I don't think that's what they're looking at, or. But anyway, I just remember feeling in that moment, there's something really different about me, and nobody can know about it. I can't
Wow.
talk to anybody about it. So I did a really good job of suppressing it, of hiding it, of not even thinking about it. And I also did a really good job of believing my own story. For many years, I would have moments that I would think about it. I would notice the differences, and I would feel like this is like, it's difficult to go on a date with somebody. Like I never wanted to go on a date with a girl, or love songs did not make sense to me. Like, why are people so dramatic? Like, I don't feel this way towards another person. Um, but I remember kind of also rationalizing it and thinking, oh, maybe I feel this way because I only have sisters. And my dad, like the masculine figure of the house, is traveling so much because he was a truck driver. So he was gone a lot. So I just got really used to being around women. Or I don't have a crush on this guy. I just look up to him. I just want to be more like him. I want to be athletic like him one day. And I want to be, strong and fit and things like that. So for many years, I believed that my own story and my own lies. Um, but I usually tell people like you can suppress something as much as you want to, but it doesn't go away. Like if you're numbing something out or suppressing something, you're not really dealing with it. If you pack it down, at some point it comes back up, right? And it turns into things. It sometimes turns into negative things, poor mental health, snark, sometimes um, really, really terrible things that a lot of people unfortunately have a hard time just kind of, coming out of. But anyway, when I was 18 years old, I met the missionaries for the first time. So up until 18, I was member of the Catholic Church, going to church every Sunday, doing all the things that I could. But as a member of the Catholic Church, at least in Brazil, in my hometown, the church wasn't a really big part of my life, not because I wasn't devout enough, but because the Catholic Church just isn't a huge part of people's lives in Brazil. You go to church on a Sunday, It's a huge congregation. You go back home, like it's not very woven in the fabric of who you are and your family and your day-to-day life, right? So I started teaching English as a second language because, I was good at it and, I loved it so much. So I was 16 and I was already teaching it. And I remember one time the missionaries came to this language school that I used to teach at because they wanted to get to know the people. They knew that we taught English there. So we just started practicing with them. They would just stop by and speak with us in English. And for me, because it was a small town, and up until that point, I had never met like a real American, just from TV, but I had never talked to somebody from the US. And I thought that was the coolest thing. So they would come twice, sometimes 3 times a week and just stop by and just hang out for a couple of hours. And then they asked us if we wanted them to teach us about the church. They talked about being missionaries of the LDS Church. They were from Murray, Utah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm actually really good friends with him and with the entire family to this day. I actually lived with them for a while. They've become my American family, really. His name's Michael Hatch. And I just remember developing this really genuine friendship with him and with the missionaries and learning about the church and feeling like, oh my gosh, like this is everything that I've always wanted the Catholic Church to be at the time. Because, the LDS Church is very much a part of your day to day life. It's not just Sundays, you have callings, it's during the week, you have all kinds of activities. Like it becomes your life. And that to me was awesome. However, my family wasn't really a fan of anybody that left the Catholic Church and joined any other church because, my last name is Cucini. It's very Italian. Like to be Catholic is a big deal. And up until that point, I was the kid that followed all the rules. And I've always been like a good kid, like rule follower, like I was never into partying. Like my sisters were the ones that wanted to go to parties and stuff like that. But I had good grades. I was very obedient, no trouble as a teenager, nothing. So for me to do something like that, it was just so out of character for my parents. And I felt like if I tell them that I'm taking the discussions with the missionaries, they're going to flip. But I feel like I should do it and I feel good about it. So, and I'm 18 now, so I don't need their permission to be baptized. So I decided to get baptized without telling them. And every Sunday, I would just make up an excuse to go to church. Like I would just tell them, I'm going to go hang out with a friend. I'm going to visit somebody. I'm going to do whatever. But really, I was walking out of the house with my backpack and my church clothes in the backpack. And I would get to church and then change into my white shirt and tie at the church building. And I can think of worse, things, than like making up an excuse and a lie to go to church. So I feel like this was a good thing. And then after about like a month, my parents started to catch on to it. And my mom was like, what's really going on? Like you're always gone on Sundays. You come back at a very particular time. You're always carrying things. She started to really observe. And until one day she finally figured out and then she freaked out. And
Wow.
so did my dad. And also part of it was because I was leaving the Catholic Church, but also because she didn't know anything about the LDS Church. And in Brazil, in my hometown, it was a small branch. So people would talk about the missionaries and talk about the church as this like cult that doesn't believe in Jesus Christ and like all these terrible things that they do. So my mom was really concerned about me because she believed whatever she heard, people saying. So I finally like I had to have a really like difficult and honest conversation with her. And I remember saying to her, I'm not asking for your permission to join the church. I am just letting you know that I already did. Like I'm already baptized. And for me to say that to her, like the kid that's super obese, like it was just
Wow.
insane. My dad didn't talk to me for a couple weeks. Like it was a big deal. But then they started, meeting the missionaries, and some of my friends would come over. And I usually say something to Brene Brown that I love, and I'm probably going to quote her a million times during the
Good.
podcast. But she says that people are very hard to hate close up. So the more you lean in, the less they become this other, type of being, and more like, the human being that we all know. So the more they got to know my friends and the missionaries and everything, the more okay they became with it. But then I decided right after I joined the church, because at the time you had to be 19 to serve a full-time mission, and I joined when I was 18. So after a few months, I was just like, I had made up my mind that I was going to serve a mission. So I hit him up again with another big piece of news. And I'm like,
Wow.
I'm actually going to go, I'm going to be a full-time missionary. It's 2 years. I can be called to go anywhere. And I'm only going to talk to you twice a year, by the way, on the phone. And my mom, like, she was like, are you insane? Like, don't you want to go to college? Like, you're not, like, are you sure? And I was really positive that that's what I needed to do. So put in my papers. Eventually, they were okay with it. Obviously, if I came to her at any time and said, Mom, actually, I'm not going to serve a mission, she would be happy about it. But, they learned to accept it. So I got my call to serve in the Porto Alegre North mission. So in the very south of Brazil. I stayed in Brazil, but at the very south. And I was, a really devout, obedient member of the church. And I think one of the reasons, many reasons, but one, like I said, I've always been a fan of spirituality. And at the time, I thought spirituality and religion were the same thing. So I was very much in the church and very obedient, but also because I thought that if I did everything right, if I followed every single commandment, if I was an example of conduct, I would be earning my points to pray the gay away.
Mm,
Like I would have this burden lifted off of my shoulders. So what do I need to do? I'm going to be obedient. What's the next thing? You serve a full-time mission, and you're a good missionary. You come home. You do all of the things that you need to do, and then that's going to get taken away, right? And my mission was actually great, very difficult, just like any mission, right? You learn a lot, you meet incredible people. I had giant blisters from day 2. And at the very beginning, I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, this seems so difficult, but you learn. And, in the words of Emma Smith, not to get churchy, but in the words of Emma Smith, strength isn't something that you have, it's something that you find. So when you have no other option, you just find it, right? So I just kept going, made incredible friends. And the mission, when I talk to other people, other gay men, sometimes they talk about how the mission was really difficult for them, the attraction piece, whatever. For me, that was actually not difficult. Like, it wasn't a problem. I was really into the work. I didn't really think about my sexuality very much. I was just really thinking one day at a time, and just really believing that doing it was going to get me, you know, was going to get me freed from this burden, that I thought was a burden, which is my orientation and sexuality and things like that. So anyway, at the time when I finished my mission after 2 years, I was talking to my mission president, and he is an incredible, supportive, like, really open-minded man. Him and his wife, like, they're both incredible. And he was a bishop before in a singles ward. He was a bishop at BYU before, so he was around a lot of young people. And later, I never talked to him during the mission about me being gay, or, I never came out to him or anybody during the mission. But he told me later that he could tell,
mm.
and he wanted to talk to me many times about it, but he never did, because he felt like that could be really hurtful if it didn't come from me first, which I agree. And I'm actually grateful that he didn't. Um, but I got to the end of my mission and had my exit interview, and I'm sure everybody listening probably knows what that means. It's just a conversation you have at the end of your mission with your mission president, and you talk about the future, your plans, your goals, whatever. And he asked me, like, what do you want to do after the mission? What is your plan, goals, aspirations? And I said, I would really love to go to BYU. Like I've been learning and studying English, since the time I was really young. I have no idea why I was so drawn to the language, but I feel like I have to use it. And education is such a big part of me, and I love it, but my family can't afford it. My dad is a truck driver. Like, we've had everything that I needed to have growing up, but like, I went to this private language school because of this scholarship, studying with the sons and daughters of doctors and lawyers. And even for them, going to college in the US was a big deal. So, like, for me to go to college as a son of a truck driver, that was like insane. But there was a part of me that just knew it was going to happen. I don't know how. So I told him, I'm just going to try and figure it out when I get home. Like at the time, I couldn't look anything up online because you couldn't, use the internet on your P days. It was just for emailing family and friends. And then he said, he was just really quiet, and he really, really believed in me. And he said, when you get home, just worry about getting in. Don't worry about paying for it. You just get in, and then we'll take care of everything else.
Wow.
So he paid for all of it. He paid for my entire education. I got a scholarship like after my first couple of semesters, because once I got there, and education has always been a big deal for me, but somebody was paying for it. So I thought I have to get straight A's. And I did. I graduated with a 4.0 and got like an award for, like being a good student at the end and everything. Um, but I just wanted to honor this gift that he had given me. And even when I got a full ride scholarship, he continued to send money for, tuition, even though I didn't need it. He was like, use it for something else. He paid for my study abroad in Europe for a whole month, just really generous man. And he was actually one of the first people that I came out to later on. And he was super, super supportive. He actually told me a really cool story. He said, like 30 years ago, because he's from Houston originally. And when he got married to his wife, who was from here, from Utah, they moved to Houston. And he said, when we first got married, and like 30 years ago, I had this group of friends, and it was three other couples, and the guys were all doctors. And we would talk about, some of the young people that would come and like come out and things like that. And they used to say to me that in their experience as doctors and, just studying the human body, the human nature experience and everything, they all believed that a person does not choose to be gay, lesbian, whatever, that you're just born that way. And he said that was not a popular thing to believe in or talk about 30 years ago in
Mm.
the church, Alex. um, but he said that was really helpful for him because then he became a bishop for young kids, and then a mission president, and then bishop at BYU. So having that under his belt was really helpful because he was able to really help young people coming out to him, instead of traumatizing them even
Mm.
more. And he said something that, Pastor Stan, I know he's been on the podcast before. I'm a really big fan. I love that guy. And he talks about a scripture that says that sometimes people will, point fingers or blame folks, because of this burden or this test or trial that tests or trials that are put on these people that they simply cannot bear. And he says the scripture doesn't say it's difficult to bear. It says they cannot bear. It is impossible for them to bear it because at some point they will collapse, And that's what my mission president told me and talked to me about. He said, I don't think the Heavenly Father would give this to you as a burden or a test, and give this to you as this burden if it's something that you just cannot change. It is impossible to change. You're born this way. So to expect of you to change it, to marry a woman, to make it work, or to give up love and intimacy, it's just not realistic. It would crush you. So he wasn't trying to talk me out of it. He was just really understanding and really supportive. And to be frank with you, he was one of the people that I was most scared of
Yeah.
coming out to, because he was so supportive and somebody that I looked up to so much, but also somebody that paid for my entire education. I just owe so much to him, and to feel that much love and support, it was really life-changing and affirming to me. um, so after my mission, then I got home, I applied to go to BYU. I got in, I went to BYU, Idaho. And I had a really good experience. I was really excited about it. Again, I loved the church so much. So the idea of going to a church school and having devotionals on Tuesdays, like I had this binder, like before Tuesday devotionals, I would print out like like the name of the person that's going with their picture, their most famous quote. I had like a place for, like I kept track of all of it. Like I loved it. That was such a huge part of my life, and something that made me so excited to be a part of, that I loved every second of it. Um, and coming from Brazil, where it's hot all the time. In my hometown, the coldest it gets in the winter, it's about 70 degrees, 65, and everybody's freaking out. And then getting to BYU, Idaho in January, when it's negative 16, it was a big shock. But
Wow.
I was loving all of it, loving all of that experience. But it was towards the end of my time at BYU that I started to really think about my sexuality a little bit more. And I will say that there were very, very specific moments and sporadic moments where thoughts would kind of bubble up to the surface, but I wouldn't entertain them. I would just kind of push them back down. Um, and I think I got really used to outsourcing all of the decision making in my life. There was something really comforting about, outsourcing all of the decisions that I needed to make. And what I mean by that is I just got used to not really thinking critically about what I felt, about what I needed, and what, my real opinions about things were, like whatever the church's stance was on something, that automatically became my opinion. It was just kind of served to me on a platter, and I would just embrace it. So if somebody asked me, what is your opinion on this? Like the first thing that I would do was, I wonder what the church's opinion and stance is. But what I was really saying is whatever their opinion is, that will also be my opinion. And towards the end of my time at BYU, I was also studying, social psychology. We were talking about lots of different things, indoctrination, like lots of different things. And I just remembered that class like stirring something up in me and doing it in a way that was kind of unsettling and very difficult to suppress. And I tell this to everybody. If you're suppressing something, if you're walking around carrying a presentational self and carrying this armor of protection, right? You can only do that for so long. What you're suppressing is not dissolving or going away. It metastasizes, it turns into other things, oftentimes really negative things, like snark, poor mental health, illness, sometimes even physical illness. And it's really important to allow yourself to feel everything that there is to feel, because the only way out of something is to go through it, and to really feel and think for yourself. And I remember when I was a missionary, even like looking at a quote on the wall. And the quote, I think it was a Thomas S. Monson quote, and it says something along the lines of, the moment you begin to question anything that is said by a general authority or a leader of the church, that is your first step towards apostasy, or something like that. And I just remember reading that and feeling really strange about it. But in that same moment, I also felt like, oh my gosh, I'm questioning what the leader just said. That's apostasy, shut it down, suppress it, don't think about it. So it took me a really long time to give myself permission to think. And I think that for anybody in the queer community, like when the church is such a big part of your life, and you have your community, your belief system, you love it, you feel good in it, to imagine that being taken away from you is just so hurtful. It feels like a death, and there's a lot of grief involved, you know? So I didn't really want to think about it. I didn't really want to entertain that thought and think what my life would be like outside of the church. So I started to get into this place where there was this disconnect between the person that I knew that I was and the person that I needed others to think that I was so that I could be accepted, so that I could continue to have a calling, so that I could pray in church, so that I could be a good member of the church. And that feels honestly emotionally violent in a way, you know? When I left BYU, once I graduated, I started working for a consulting firm called Dealer Socket. I don't know if you're familiar, but like the owners of the firm were also LDS. Um, and a lot of what we did, like all that we did really, was spend time with clients, like traveling across the US. So every single week I would get an assignment to go and visit a client and spend the week with a client. So flying a lot, right? And I remember there was this one particular instance where I was on this flight and there was a lot of turbulence on the flight, more than usual. And to the point that people were starting to freak out. And I just remember looking at that and I was in the thick of it, like deep depression, really not like loving myself, really kind of like hating myself, not wanting to be gay, wanting to push it away and thinking I've done everything that I needed to do to get this big burden taken away from me. I've tried dating, but like dating at BYU felt like a chore. You know, I hated it. I didn't connect with anybody, like any of the girls that I dated. It just felt like a task. And the thought of marrying a woman, which I almost did, just felt, I can't even explain like what it felt like to you, but it just didn't feel like something that I could do. So I started to contemplate like, what is my life going to be like? Is this it? Like, is this never going to go away? And I think to me, the definition of hope is believing that your tomorrow could be different from today. And when you lose that, when you feel like your tomorrow is never going to be different, it's not going to get better. It's probably going to be worse. You know, then you start to question, should I even be here? Like, what is the
Wow.
point? You know? And I remember like on that flight, like everybody freaking out and like it was so turbulent. And I remember thinking, and I was 27, and I remember thinking, if this plane goes down, awesome.
Wow.
Because then nobody would know. I don't have to talk to anybody. Like nobody's going to criticize me. I'm not going to be misunderstood. You know, I don't have to leave the church. I just remember looking at that like a kid would look at a Christmas gift.
Wow.
And every time that I got in a flight, and like being really sad when the plane didn't, you know, when the plane landed, I just remember feeling upset, you know, like just praying every single time that I got in a plane, you know, like I hope that this is it. I hope that this happens, you know. But I also remember at some point having a feeling of, I don't think this is healthy. I don't think that as a 27-year-old, healthy, you know, I'm in the US. It was my dream to come here to go to school. I have a good job. I'm seeing, you know, the world. I'm traveling. Like, I don't think that it's good for me to think of death as a good, positive thing, as, you know, something that I aspire to, you know, at this point in my life. So I should talk to somebody. And I'm really grateful that I had that moment of insight because as the CEO of Encircle now, I sit with parents that will tell me their stories and the stories of their kids taking their own lives
Wow.
because they were thinking the same thing and feeling the same thing, but they didn't talk to anybody, you know? And I think that when you have these really tough emotions, and for anybody listening to this right now that might be going through it, when you have these really tough emotions, and I'm going to call it shame, and again, very Brene Brown, right? Shame is a social construct. It's how I see myself through your lens. It's believing that there's something about me that, if known to you, will make me unworthy of your love and of belonging. And if you give shame three things, like Brene says, if you put shame in a petri dish and you douse it with silence, with secrecy, and with judgment, it grows exponentially. It takes over your entire life. But shame cannot survive being spoken. The second you begin to speak shame, when you talk to somebody about this thing that is really shaming to you, shame has to go away. It does not survive. But it's very difficult, right? Because we can all think of something that, if you just imagine walking into a room and hearing people talking about that thing that really shames you, like you just have this visceral reaction in your stomach, right? So it's really difficult to get to that point. But this is a promise that I can make to people. If you find somebody that you can share your story with. And I'm not saying just share it with anybody, because it could be more damaging, right? If you get more judgment. I'm saying find somebody who earned the privilege to hear your story, because your story is a privilege to hear. Find that person that will hear that story and that will love you, not in spite of your story, but because of it. And shame will dissolve. And once it does, you get to a point where you can share your story, and it doesn't matter what other people are going to think about you, because at that point, the self is so concrete and so healed that you can get up in front of a group of people, or you can go on a podcast like I'm doing right now and talk about this so openly. But the thought of doing this 10, 15 years ago, like I never thought that I would ever talk about this out loud, you know? So when I had that moment of clarity that I needed to talk to somebody, that I needed to reach out and get some help, I'm just really grateful for that moment, because that's really what saved me.
Mm.
And the first thing that I did, in the beginning, I was like, I can't talk to a person yet. That's very hard to do. So I wonder what people are saying online, which I think, like a podcast like this, is so helpful and life-saving, because I guarantee that there is a lot of people that are doing it right now, or did it before, before they came out to somebody, they listened to the stories. And I just remember finding, and you're probably familiar with this, it's a series of videos. They were called The Far in Between Project by filmmaker Will Cox. I don't know if it still exists online, but you can find some videos online. And it's just a bunch of LDS men and women sharing their story, talking about being LDS, coming out, what it was like. And I just remember hearing it, like watching it and listening to the stories. And it's like, I just felt this is my story, like over and over and over again. The other thing about shame is shame has to buy into the belief that you are alone in the experience. So you also don't share your story with other people because you feel like you're the only one going through it, right? But once you share your story and you feel empathy, you feel like other people know the experience behind it, that's also healing. And it's the healing balm for shame, right? Because shame is such a social construct, we need a social balm to heal it.
Wow.
So think about why what makes it so difficult for somebody to be in the queer community. It's probably because of shame and a relationship, right? Like you come out to your parent no longer wants to talk to you, or you come out to a friend, you lose your friends or classmates or neighbors or whatever, right? You lose your church, whatever. So if the relationship is the wound, a relationship also needs to be the healing balm. So that's when empathy kind of comes in. And I think empathy is very different from sympathy. Sympathy saying, I'm sorry for you, but I'm really glad that I'm not you. And empathy is saying, I feel with you. And in the work that I do at Encircle, like I meet so many people, and sometimes I meet people like, male, white, heterosexual, upper class, Judeo-Christian. Am I describing you right now, Richard?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, sometimes like these people say to me, is it even appropriate for me to be a part of Encircle? Because I'm not queer. I don't have any queer kids. I'm in a position of privilege. I don't know if it's even appropriate. And this is what I tell them. Empathy is not about having gone through the same experience. It's not about you being queer or having a queer kid. It's about knowing the emotion behind the experience. Because if you think that empathy depends on having the same experience, that's actually disconnecting, right? Think about it this way. Let's say that I get fired at work and then I come to you, Richard, and I say, I got fired in front of my coworkers today. I'm really upset. And let's say that you also got fired at work at some point in your life, but for you, it was freeing. You were like, I hated that job. What are you talking about? Why are you so upset? It's awesome. You're going to find something so much better. Sometimes going through the same experience and focusing on that, it's more disconnecting.
Mm.
But if somebody comes out to you, even though you've never been through the experience, and you ask them, how do you feel? What are you feeling right now? And they say, I feel shame. I feel like I'm not worthy. I feel like I'm not good enough. Like I'm going to lose a lot of my relationships that are really important to me. Then in that moment, all you need to do is to go into this reservoir of emotions in your personal life and find any experience, maybe an experience that has nothing to do with coming out or being queer, but find any experience that knows that feeling. And then you can sit with that person and be empathetic towards them because it's really about the feeling behind the experience. And here's the other thing about empathy. When somebody shares something really difficult with you, sometimes you want to be the person that, will say something that will heal and soothe and everything will go away and that person is going to feel so much better right off the bat, right? That's not going to happen. When somebody shares something really difficult and personal with you, there's not much that you can say that will make it better. What makes it better is connection. And sometimes it's not even saying anything. Sometimes it's just squeezing their hand and saying, I don't even know what to tell you right now, but I'm just glad that you told me and I will walk with you, you know? So this feeling of walking with is really what people need. And it's really what's going to dissolve this feeling of shame and help them love themselves and build them back up so that one day they can be this person holding up the torch and lighting up the way for somebody that's just starting to take those steps, right? And that's what happened to me. So watching those far in between videos, like it just made me feel like I wasn't alone. So I started reaching out to some of the people in those videos. I remember reaching out to Lee Beckstead, who's a therapist, famous therapist for the LGBT community. I remember reaching out to this guy, Alan Miller, who was a bishop in the LDS Church, was married for 20 years, and then came out after 20 years of marriage, 5 kids, and then getting a lot of support from him. And then I came out to a gay friend, and it was really difficult, even though he was a
Wow.
gay, and it was difficult. And then to somebody else, and then somebody else. And I started to feel all this love and all this support, but I hadn't yet come out to my family. That seemed really difficult for me. And here's the thing that I will say for parents. I don't think people realize this, and I think it's much better now, but without knowing it, sometimes parents create an environment that is inhospitable for the kid to come out. How? I remember my dad, and I have a great relationship with my family. We're really close. And my dad and my mom, examples of love, of service, unconditional love, incredible. My sisters, but without knowing it, they were creating this environment that was inhospitable for me to come out. Like my dad would make gay jokes, sometimes, especially, when I was a teenager growing up in Brazil. Like if there was a gay character on TV, that gay character was always like less than human. It was the character that was okay for people to make fun of and for people to bully, and my parents never said anything about it. So I just remember looking at that and thinking, well, I'm not that. I don't want to be that. And this is what my parents really think about gay people. They don't know I'm gay. So if I were to come out, they would say these things about me. I don't want to lose them. They're going to be embarrassed of me. So I didn't come out to them. even though I was starting to come out to a lot more people here, right? And my parents were in Brazil. I was here. I was like, I'm not going to come out. They don't have to know about this. It's my thing. I'm in the US. I'm so far away from them. And then once I started to, embrace my life as a gay man more and more, I ran into another problem. And the problem was I don't really know who I am as a gay man. I'm like, I've never had a model. Like, I've never seen like a healthy relationship, like a gay couple with a healthy relationship that was not modeled to me. And I just remembered like hearing in the church so much wickedness was never happiness. If you leave the church, and I was leaving the church at that point, I stopped going around that time. And I just remember thinking, if I leave the church, what that means is I have to embrace this lifestyle that is, you know, that is wickedness, in a way. So partying, drinking, not heavily or anything like that, but doing all of these things that I had never done before because they were not things that I felt like were me. Like I never really wanted to do those things, but I thought, well, to be a gay man is to be fill in the blank. So I'm just going to go ahead and do those things, right? And I did that for a while, but just felt like really empty. I'm like, what I really want is a relationship. Like, I don't want to be like going around meeting all these guys and like going to parties and clubs and drink. Like that's so not me. And it just feels so empty. And I just remember I was in a hotel room one time because I was traveling for work still with Dealer Socket. And I remember this quote by Alexander Pope that I heard from a mission president's wife. And like in a church talk when I was a missionary. And the quote was, "Vice is a monster of such frightful mien. As to be hated, it needs but to be seen. But seen too oft, familiar with its face, we first endure, and then pity, but then embrace." And I felt that's what I'm doing. I'm embracing all of these things that I've always felt like, were so not me. Not that it was wrong to do any of those things. Like people know what they want to do and what's best for them. But what I'm trying to say is, I'm not criticizing anybody that's doing anything out there in the community. What I'm saying is, I felt like I needed to do something as a gay man, even though those were not the things that I wanted to do, if that makes sense. Um, so at that point, I just made a decision. I was like, you know what? I am just not gonna worry about dating anybody. Like, it doesn't seem like anybody wants to have a relationship or marriage or anything like that. I'm just gonna have like a ton of friends and live my life and, see what happens. And it was very funny that a week or two later, that's when I met my now husband, Matt.
Wow.
It was it was at a birthday party at an Outback Steakhouse of all places. We had mutual friends, and one of my friends that went to BYU with me, he was having a birthday party there, and he moved here to Salt Lake City um, a couple of semesters before I did. So um, I went and I saw Matt, and he saw me. We were not together, sitting together. It was a big group of people. And then later he came and talked to me after the birthday party when we were walking out, because he served a mission in Brazil. So he spoke Portuguese and he heard that I was from Brazil. So he came and spoke a little bit of Portuguese with me and then added me on Facebook, and we started chatting and chatting and chatting, for days until we went on our first date. And at the time, I was living here in Salt Lake City because once I graduated from BYU, Idaho, and Rexburg, I moved in with the family of the missionary that baptized me, because I would travel every week and I would just stay home on the weekends. And until I found a place, I lived with them for about a year. And I'm still really good friends with them. They even went to Brazil to pick him up when he finished his mission in 2004. So I got to meet them in Brazil, and his mom and I are the best of friends. We go on mom dates. I go on mom dates with her all the time. I did a couple weeks ago. So we still have a really solid relationship. And I remember when I went on my very first date with Matt, my dinner date, we went to Ruth's Diner. We were just sitting down, and I love like a deep conversation and like, like really getting to know people like deep down and everything. So I was like, I'm gonna play a game with you. I'm gonna interview you. I'm gonna pretend like I'm Oprah Winfrey. I'm gonna ask you like a bunch of questions. And he was like, oh, haha, fun. And I started asking him a bunch of questions. And I remember asking, what is your biggest fear? Like, what do you fear the most? Um, and he said, my biggest fear is that I will one day, you know, bring a guy home to my parents, because at that point he had talked to his parents about being gay one time, but they never talked about it again. And a long time passed. Like my husband went through all the things, he went to Journey into Manhood, like conversion therapy type stuff, he
Wow.
did, yeah. He did all of it. Like once he came out to his bishop sent him to a therapist. He actually ended up going to David Matheson, who's now, changed his approach about,
Yeah.
an understanding about the LGBT experience. But my husband also has a sister with special needs, with cerebral palsy, that needs a lot of help for everything. And the therapist that he went to through the church told him that he was gay because he had a sister with special needs, and he
Oh
used
my
to help his
gosh.
mom. He used to help his mom take care of her, and helping his mom take care of his sister was a very feminine quality. And that is what was the catalyst for
Oh
him
my
being
gosh.
gay. And can you imagine how traumatizing that is?
Oh my gosh.
He was thinking, well, I thought I was just being a good son, helping my mom take care of my sister, So it's trauma on top of trauma and journey into manhood. It's a whole thing on his own. But I just remember him saying, I am scared that, I would one day bring a guy home and that my dad would disown me and like kind of kick me out of the family and want nothing to do with me. And I swear to you, I had this like the weirdest out of body experience in that moment. As soon as he said it, I felt like I was hovering over my body. And I just remember thinking, like, with this clarity, I am going to be the person that you're going to bring home. I'm going to be the first one. We are going to get married, and your dad will kick you out of the family. And then just kind of like snap right back into my body.
Oh my
And it
God.
was the very first date. Very strange, very weird. And sure enough, that's what happened.
Wow.
Yeah. So after I met him and we started dating, we only dated for 10 months and then we got married. Um, But once we started dating and we felt, okay, this is real, like I feel like my connection with him, it's almost like my heart always knew he existed. And then it was like the two souls and hearts that would one day find each other. So it was a moment of recognition. When I found him from the very beginning, I just knew he was this person and this promise of love that I thought at some point I wasn't worthy of or wasn't going to be for me. But I just remember feeling like, oh, this is everything that I knew and felt like I would have one day. I thought it was going to be a woman with kids and stuff like that at some point in the church, but this is like all of that and more. Um, and it was just like this recognition of souls that always knew that they would one day be quote unquote destined to find each other and help each other out, through this journey. So when I felt that and we started dating, I thought, okay, now I need to come out to my family. Now I have a reason. This is serious. This is real. I need to say something. So I decided to write a letter to my family, and I wrote this letter and talked about like many of the things that I already mentioned here with you, and just kind of walking them through the experience. And sometimes people will say to me, oh, you don't have to explain yourself to anybody. And that's not really what I was trying to do. I was trying to help people understand what it's like to be a gay man from the time that you're very young. And I don't think that it's realistic for you to come out to somebody, especially somebody who's never been exposed to the LGBT community, has no idea what it's like to be in that community, and expect them to understand or accept you in 10 minutes because it took me 27 years for me to accept myself. So, how can I expect my parents to just get it? And sometimes people do, and bless them, for getting it so quickly. But I really wanted to take the time and help them understand what it was like. To grow up as a gay kid, and I think it was really helpful. I think that, my mom later told me that it was such a clear picture and it was so interesting for her, for my dad and my family to kind of replay in their heads, like me as a kid, teenager, like so much more made sense that they didn't know and understand once I was able to articulate to them what the experience is like. And I actually recruited one of my aunts. Like my parents are 79. She's got my mom and my dad, they're going to be 80 next year. And I thought, okay, different generation, very religious in the Catholic world. Like I need somebody to help me. So I went to my youngest aunt who was more open-minded. I sent the letter to her and I said, can you go to my house and, read this with my mom and my dad?
That's a
I
great
just need
idea.
I just need somebody there that they know, love, and respect to be with them to help them through it. And she went and she read the letter and it was very emotional for them. And it was really cool because later my mom said she told me that the hardest thing for her wasn't the fact that I was gay. It was the fact that for many years I had struggled
Mm,
with depression, anxiety, suicide ideation, and of all people, I did not think that I could talk to my mom about it. And that was really painful for her to hear. Um, but again, I think people are doing the best they can with the tools they have, right? Like she didn't have that tool in her toolbox. She didn't know better. She couldn't do better. So I think that understanding the experience and understanding what it's like to be in my shoes and in the shoes of, to be in the shoes of anybody in the community is really what they needed to have a reason to think about this a little bit differently. So we flew to Brazil about a couple months after that letter for them to meet Matt in person. And I was really scared, obviously, even though, my parents were supportive. Like I talked to them on the phone. I gave them a little bit of time to process the emotion and everything. Um, but then we went to Brazil for them to meet Matt, and I think it was really healing for them because they saw that I was exactly the same person.
mm,
And that's what my dad told me after. He said, I was really like scared of this whole thing, and I was really hurting. I think that there was a part of me that thought that you were going to come in, and it was going to be this different person that I didn't know. But when I saw that you were the same, but not just the same, but better, happier, more authentic,
wow.
um, I could not be happier for you and, like for the relationship and for what you have. And I'm really glad that we had this support because with Matt's family, like once he talked to his dad again about, our relationship, then it wasn't the same, right? Like his dad said, I want nothing to do with you anymore. Don't come to my house ever again. Alex is never welcome in this house. Um, you're an embarrassment to this family. I never wanted much out of life. I just wanted a family that I could be,
Oh
proud
my
of and
gosh.
don't ever come to my house. So his dad did not talk to him or me for 11 years.
Wow.
He started to talk to us 3 months ago,
Wow.
literally. Yeah. And Matt's family was supportive. His mom, she passed away 3 months ago.
Oh wow.
And she was very kind, very supportive. Matt's sisters, very kind, very supportive. And his mom, unfortunately, passed away at home in front of his dad in the middle of the night 3 months ago. And that experience really shook him up. And now, for the first time, once we went down there because they live in southern Utah, he welcomed me into the house. He shook my hand for the first time. He talked to me for the very first time in 11 years. I just broke down crying because, I had gotten to the point, like we both had gotten to the point that we thought this is never going to happen. Like he's not going to come around. Like we didn't think that he was going to come around. But then he asked me to be a pallbearer. He pulled me into the family photos. He introduced me to people, in the neighborhood, people in the ward during the viewing as Matt's husband, like
Oh,
all of the things that we never thought were going to be possible. And that's also what I mean by, people are doing the best that they can with the tools that they have. And I'm not going to be like, naive to say that I've always felt that way, that it's always been easy, because sometimes it is difficult, like to see a parent rejecting a kid. It is very hard. And it was hard to see what it did to my husband, to Matt, like over the course of many years, feeling rejected by his dad. But his mom used to say to us that his dad would still pray for him every night. And he thought that, supporting us and welcoming us into the family would be supporting this lifestyle, the very lifestyle that would get Matt kicked out of the celestial kingdom and make it impossible for him to live with his family forever. That was the rationale behind it. And when I say that people are doing the best they can with the tools that they have, the tools can be upbringing, they can be religion, they can be generation, they can be how well you slept that day, they can be how tired, they can be mental health. And the tools change every day. And I just think that his dad had a really crappy toolbox. And once he gained a new, sharper tool, he was able to do things and see things that he wasn't able to see before. And of course, that Matt and I, like, we would love for this to have happened many years ago when his mom, Becky, was still alive, so that we could have family stuff together. Like, for example, we just had our very first Thanksgiving dinner as a family together for the first time in 11 years. Um, and the whole time we were thinking, well, I wish Becky was here, you know? And I wish that, she could be a part of it because it's everything that she wanted. And she's not, but I'm also not going to be resentful because, life is strange, learning and, you know, understanding and knowledge, it's not linear. And I just have to accept that, people come around and understand things at different moments and different times in life. So I'm just really grateful that now we have a relationship with him and we have this family relationship. And at the same time, I think that there is a little bit of grief that goes into it, knowing that there's also a death of, the family memories that we wish that we could still build together that we know are not going to be a possibility. Um, but with all of that said, now we've been together for 10 years. Like you said, after I graduated from college, I worked in banking, investment banking for 8 years. I was a vice president at Goldman Sachs. I really cherished my time working for Goldman Sachs. It's a huge firm. I got to learn a lot about running businesses. And as a VP in the firm, you're running businesses across, the globe, working with people in so many different regions and countries and things like that. But there was a part of me that was just not being fulfilled. Like I was hungry for something that felt like I knew the feeling behind it. I knew the feeling behind what I wanted to be doing with my time and what I felt like were my skills and talents. I was just having a hard time like knowing where to look for it. And then one of the board members that I've been really good friends with for about 10 years reached out to me because the previous CEO for Encircle was moving on to work with the Huntsman Group, the Huntsman Mental Health Group, and they were looking for a new CEO. And this friend of mine, David, like he knew my skill set. He knew what I wanted to do. He knew that I was passionate about the community and the LGBT community. And he reached out asking if it was something that I would be interested in pursuing. And to be honest with you, when he said it's, this role is for the CEO of Encircle, I went home and I talked to my husband about it. And I was like, I have no business, being CEO of anything, like this is too big. I'm not going to interview. And my husband was like, are you insane? Like, you were made for this role. Like, your entire life and trajectory. Like, it was a path that you had to follow. And all of the things that we have gone through were to get you ready to be in this seat. Of course, you should interview. And I thought, okay, fine. So I talked to the board members, the chair of the board, talked to staff members, to Jordan's Grow, who was the CEO at the time. And eventually the job was offered to me. And it was scary, but also I feel like honestly, fear is an indication that you should lean in if there's something that really scares you. Sometimes people feel like, oh, I'm in a lot of fear right now. That means I need to run away. And I think that fear means run towards, it's highlighting something that you should do. And then I jumped in and I've been at Encircle now for for a year and a half. I joined the organization in June of 2024. And I am really, really grateful that I did. Encircle is literally the organization that I wish existed for me when I was a young queer kid in the middle of nowhere in Brazil, feeling alone, um, feeling like I needed to hide and have this presentational self or persona to navigate the world, and I feel like that's what a lot of the kids that come to Encircle feel. I think it's about understanding the difference between, loving yourself and striving for excellence versus perfectionism. I think that perfectionism has always been a thing in my personal life that was very difficult to understand and kind of snap out of. And I think perfectionism, what it really says, it's not about being perfect. I think striving for excellence, it's all about how can I do better, be better, show up better, for myself, my family, my community. And perfectionism is just saying, what will other people think? Has nothing to do with being perfect. It's about managing other people's expectations and shame. Like, it's thinking if I can do everything perfect, say everything perfectly, I will minimize shame and judgment. And I think that's just impossible. So when I think of Encircle, I think of this beautiful place, this home. It's furnished like a home. It looks like a home. It is a home for this feeling of home. It's not residential, but it's this place where a lot of these kids, they can come in, and for them, it might be the only place that they can come in and they can hang up this armor of perfectionism and presentation that they carry around to protect them, to keep them alive, but it's really heavy. So, of all places, they can hang it up, they can exhale, they can take a breath, and they can be who they really are and create relationships with people, not with the presentational version of themselves, but with the core of who they really are. And that's what's really healing for them. Um, I know you're very familiar with the organization, right, with Encircle, but also there might be a lot of people listening, maybe for the very first time listening and hearing about Encircle. Encircle is an organization, is a nonprofit that started here in Utah in 2017 by this incredible human being, Stephanie Larson. Stephanie was an attorney in DC. She was in DC fighting for the family, the traditional family, husband, wife, kids. She met her husband, Mitch, in DC. They moved to Provo, Utah. And Mitch had an uncle, John Williams, who's very famous here in Utah, businessman, restaurateur, gay man, out, was married at the time. And Stephanie will say, that was my first exposure, to like a gay man. And she will say, at the time, I would have described him as the most Christ-like person. that I had ever met. And it was really puzzling for her, because at the time, like 20, 25 years ago, like the things that people were saying in the church about gay people were not the same things that people are saying today. But she just remembers like this cognitive dissonance between what people would say about gay people in the church and what John Williams was like, this really incredible Christ-like person. And then Stephanie in Provo, Utah started to have kids. They were married, they started to have kids, and her kids would come home and like share stories about how friends or people in their schools, like other kids, were taking their lives because they were gay, lesbian, and trans in the LGBT community. And Stephanie thought, oh my gosh, like Provo might be the most dangerous person for a young queer person. And she was so bothered by it. And she felt like she needed to do something, to help these kids. And she is remarkable, much like you, Richard, like we were talking earlier, and you were saying, I don't have any queer kids or anything like that. And I think it takes a different caliber of people like you and Stephanie to not be queer, to not have queer kids, queer members of the family, but still care so much about somebody else's existence that you want to do something for them to help them out. And that's what Stephanie did. Like she had this vision of, I want to have a home for the kids to come in and just be themselves. We'll bake cookies, like they'll just have a good time, and they'll just feel good about themselves and feel loved. And she talked to John Williams about it. And she said that she started, talking to him like, will you support it? And he was the first person that donated the first
Wow.
$100,000, to the organization. And she was like driving around Provo, Utah, like looking for this house. And she found this beautiful historic home, um, in Provo, right by the Provo Temple. And then she's FaceTiming John Williams, and she's like, John, I found the perfect home. Look at this. And then he said, right next to the temple. Are you insane, Stephanie? You have to find a home that's in the back corner of like some random street where the kids can park in the back. They're going to be so scared to go in. Like you have to be like in a hidden area to make it comfortable for them. And she said, no, like she had a vision, she said, no, I want a place that is quote unquote center stage, like just like the Provo Temple. It's right in the middle of it. I want these kids to feel like they deserve just as much visibility, just as much love, just as much attention. I want the home to be beautiful because that's a representation of how we feel about these kids, that they deserve the best. They deserve all these beautiful things as well. She said it was the first time that she and John disagreed on something. And then she called her friend, Holly Alden, that I love, another incredible human being. And she said, Holly, look, I've found this home, in Provo. I have this idea, like creating this place for the kids, for queer kids. And Holly said, and she asked Holly, like, will you donate to help me buy this home? And Holly said, I'll just buy it for you and you can use it. And Holly bought the home, and that's the home that we still use. It's Holly's home that we just use for Encircle Provo. And the cool thing is, Stephanie said to me that nobody knew what Encircle was in the beginning. People were like, what is this organization? Like, are they talking bad about the church? Are they coming after the church? Like it hit the news. And they were a little bit scared when they opened. It was Valentine's Day, 2017, and they were putting furniture in, and they thought, what's going to happen here? Like, are we going to get picketed? Like, are people going to throw rocks? What's going to happen? And she said that there was a lot of people ending their shifts at the temple that day that saw the home and looked at what was happening, and they stopped by instead of going to their cars and driving home. They stopped by and they helped put furniture in. Like they started carrying furniture, started helping organize the home. Like it was just such a beautiful like example of what unconditional love looks like and feels like. That from the beginning, I think really sets Encircle apart. You know, we have this beautiful motto called "No Sides, Only Love." Which means that Encircle is a neutral organization in terms of religion, in terms of politics. And I've talked about this before, Richard, like at speaking events and things, and people will say, well, I don't like this neutrality thing, you know, because if you're being neutral, it means you're benefiting the oppressor. And I understand what people are saying, you know, like I'm not saying that people have to be neutral in their personal lives. I think that it's important for you to feel like you have a passion and a cause and you fight for it. What I'm saying is, Encircle is this place where a lot of people who are in the process of coming out, early stages of coming out, where it's very tender, you know, very fragile. Parents who just had a kiddo come out to them and they have no idea what to do. They're coming into Encircle. It's the first organization that they come to. So if there's any bias or any type of like side taking, you know, that makes people feel judged. And as I mentioned before, judgment is one of the three things that poured into shame will exacerbate it and make the whole situation even worse. So instead of talking about what makes us different, Encircle is the place where we talk about what makes us the same, because we can have 100 reasons, 100 things that will make you and I different. But if we have 100 differences, we probably have 1,100 things that makes us human, you know? And that's what I really want to protect in the organization. It's been a part of Encircle since the beginning. It's not a place where we're going to talk about religion. It's not a place where we're going to talk about political parties. We're going to talk about mental health. It's all about mental health and about suicide prevention. And there's no one way or one path for everyone in the LGBT community. All we're trying to do at Encircle is to help people love themselves, see themselves for this beautiful person and being that they are, and to give them some tools in terms of mental health so that they can figure out what the path is going to be for themselves. They can author their own future. And that's going to be different for everybody. Some people are queer and they want to stay in the church. Awesome. Some people are queer and they decide to leave the church. Awesome. Like, I'm not here, and Encircle is not here to dictate what the path is for anyone. We're here to help people, to give them tools, to help strengthen their mental health so they can make that decision for themselves. Um, I'm really, really lucky and really fortunate to be a part of this organization. To see the change in these kids. Like, you talk to parents, you talk to the kids, like you see how sometimes kids come in and the light in their eyes, you know, it's just dimmed, you know, like the the smile isn't in their eyes at first, you know, and over time, as they learn to love themselves and as they build relationships, you see them coming back to life, you know, and we offer that in so many different ways. We have, you know, therapy, clinical therapy, we bill insurance, you know, we have about 9 or 10 different insurance that people can use. We have a scholarship program for people that want to have therapy but can't afford it and qualify. There's an application that they can go through and apply and 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 get therapy that way. We also have the resource center side of the organization, which is all free, and we have music workshops, we have art workshops, support groups that we call friendship circles. We have different speaker events, people that will come and share their stories and build community that way. We have what we call rainbow brunches, which is a cool, fun entry point for a lot of people in the community on a Saturday once a month. We just get together, you know, like over food, and there's music, games, things like that for people to just get close um, and understand that there's nothing about this experience that is different from the people that they already know and the people that they already love. You know, like, we're here really just to help each other walk home and to do it safely and to keep the family together. We have parent programs as well for the parents that just had a kid come out and they have no idea what to do. You know, I talked to a parent recently and she said, I just had a kid come out, my kid come out to me, 13 years old, in the middle of the night. I wanted to help. And I promised my kid that we're going to go through it together and that I love them. And then I went back into my bedroom and cried because I have no idea what to do. Like it's never been a part of my survival to look at these things. Like I don't know how to show up for my kid and I'm scared for my kid because of the world out there. And Encircle is this place where you can meet people, you can build relationships with people. And I think that Encircle, like the big buzzword really, like I don't think Encircle is a healer. I think the key word for Encircle is compassion. And my definition of compassion, like the one that I love the most, it comes from Pema Chodron, a Buddhist nun. And she says, compassion is not the relationship between the healer and the wounded. Compassion is a relationship between equals. It's knowing your darkness so you can sit in the dark with other people. So when these people are coming in, the kids, the parents, the young adults, it's people that might be going through something really difficult, trying to strengthen their mental health and things like that. And they will find professionals, they will find adults, they will find staff members, people that understand that experience, that will walk with them. And they're not here to heal them, but they also have their own darkness that they understand. They can be in the dark with them and they can help them out of it just by walking with them. And they become that person that, can hold up a torch and light up the way for them so that they can then one day become that person for other people as well. So it's really an organization where people learn what they need and get the tools that they need so that they can thrive. There's a lot of joy, there's a lot of happiness in those homes. If you haven't been to an Encircle home, I recommend that you go. We're open every weekday from 3 p.m. until 8 p.m. At night. We have drop-in hours from 3 to 5 o'clock where the kids, the youth that just come in, they do homework, they bake cookies, they can play games. And then we have programming from 5 or 5:30 until 8 o'clock at night. And it's just a really beautiful example of what love, unconditional love, looks like when it's a verb, when it's in action.
Thank you, Alex. This is one of the very best podcasts we've done, listeners. I've been so deeply moved, like you have, by Alex. I don't have words to express my gratitude for you and the man you are, the work you're doing, your great heart, your vision, your character, your ability to quote wonderful people. Some of those quotes, like our listeners, are going back and writing down, like I am. Just some comments, listeners. I love the word hope, Alex, and that you being on that airplane, wanting your Christmas present to be that plane crash, just is so honest about where you were and so different than where you are now. And you being honest about your journey gives other queer people hope that if Alex got through that, I can get through that. One of the greatest gifts you give to people in your, I'm going to call it a ministry, is hope. And you've been doing that offline for a long time. You're doing it now more in an organized way with Encircle. But you have a great story, and it's a powerful story, giving hope. That may be the best episode on shame we've ever done. We talk about shame a lot. Brene Brown's really helped me understand shame. But you bringing that to life through your own story and talking about shame in such a powerful way. I believe, listeners, Satan's real, but I've always sort of thought his greatest tool is actually shame. That's where I've netted out on those two things, and the ability to create a social structure, shame. And I don't think Satan's behind all of that, but to separate that from the love of ourselves, use shame to separate us from the hope in our future, to separate us from God, and to believe God can actually love somebody like us. And so you're a de-shamer in a powerful way. And it's one of the greatest gifts of your ministry is to take shame out of other people because you've done it yourself and you've done the hard work. It's not just theoretical where you're reading from a book. It's so powerful when you share your own story. Our church, listeners, for those of you that are LDS, are about families. And you and Matt are a beautiful family.
Thank
And
you.
I am so glad you found each other. You know, I may have been a little bit like Matt's father at one point, and it's taken me what you've invited us to do. People are hard to hate. Close up, move in to recognize the beauty of your family. And that there was a little nugget that just got me. Well, there's a lot of nuggets, but when you were approached about the Encircle job, you had a life partner to come home to and bounce that idea off. I just thought of my own wife throughout my whole life, my career, and 35 years of marriage, um, and just the beauty marriage. I just love the institution of marriage. For those of you that are part of that or want to be a part of it, and what Matt said to you is what you needed to hear to take the job at Encircle. And Matt's supportive voice for you, and just what a beautiful insight into the health of your beautiful marriage. I am so glad you have each other. And I assume Matt could be on the podcast and talk about all the ways you've helped him. And I love marriage, listeners, and I'm glad that marriage equality is legal in America and people like Matt and Alex can be together. And I love the way you frame up helping people find their way forward. I've always felt my job as an ally is to help people write their own story and do it when they're in their best space to do it. And you and Matt have done that. When you found Matt, I think you were your personal best. You had worked through so much shame. You'd come out. You were in, at least to a lot of people, and it was a perfect time to find Matt. You recognized the club scene wasn't really your deal, but there's less of a sort of examples of how to do this. And you were so self-aware, Alex, that you want to do this on your terms, authentic to you. And the club scene may work for some people, like you give grace to, but it wasn't your thing. And then you go to Outback and we love Outback at our house, by the way. And you find Matt. And this is just a beautiful love story. And then there's all these beautiful things about reconnection and reconciliation that are part of your story, including Matt's father after 11 years and him introducing you at Becky's funeral as Matt's husband, and how long it's taken him to get there. But then your grace to him that he just had the best tools he had until he learned better tools. You are teaching us about grace in your story, Alex. And a lot of people go through really angry stages, and you know that. You've seen that maybe in your own life and other queer people, but I think when we can get to the stage of where you are, it's a better place to be. It takes a long time. A lot of people have so much pain and anger. So be kind to yourself if you're not where Alex is right now. But Alex represents hope and reconciliation and grace, and you've shedded all the layers of who you thought society wanted to be, and you're living your authentic self. And then these people that loved you mentioned the Hatch family by name, that Elder Hatch found you, brought you into the church, has seen you come out, be married to Matt, and seems like the Hatch's relationship with you has not changed. And you worried about that. Of course you worried about it. And then there's your mission president that opened this door for your whole career and the way that they just loved you. These are incredible examples for those of you that are LDS of you can be way LDS and way committed and way support queer people on the path that they feel is best. We develop a false dichotomy that to fully love and follow God, we have to stop loving some of his children. I just think we've complicated love thy neighbor as thyself. And we can love Alex and Matt, and we don't have to sell out our personal beliefs to do that. And it helps them to feel our love. I think they make better choices. So I could talk, I've written down a bunch of notes, and you listeners will have completely different things that popped you out in the podcast. You that are queer, some of you message me and say your stories are just the thing that's keeping me alive right now on my top bunk at age 17. I'm not out to anybody. Alex's story is powerful for you. I don't need to add any words to that, but you have the same beautiful life ahead of you that Alex has. And however that looks for you, Alex isn't saying like do my path. He's just saying, become your very best self and then find your future that's best for you. And that may look different for you. One of the things I like to say is it's really good to listen to other stories, just like Alex did when he started to connect with other stories. But at the end of the day, you've got to write your own story and own it. And you can't write it out of anger. You can't write it because someone else's story feels good to you. And you've got to write that. And I think God will help you, for those of you to believe in a higher power. I think God really wants to be in your life and will help you. Now, some of you may not believe in God, and I hope that's not triggering. But I think he loves you, and I don't think that love is earned. I've always felt my queer friends need to look in the mirror and believe that part, and believe that God loves them and they're created as intended, that they're not a mistake, and that they're beautiful just the way they are, just like my straight friends look in the mirror and feel the same thing. And Alex has obviously done that. I love Encircle. Hearing about Stephanie just brings tears to my eyes, because I wasn't in her inner circles, maybe in the second or third circle, and had the chance to go to her home a couple times and meet Mitch and their beautiful family. And I loved hearing, you remind us of the vision of Stephanie and Holly and John Williams, who's gone. And you're honoring them as CEO to remind us about John and Mitch, and of course, Stephanie, who's still with us. And I love you talking about John being one of the most Christian people. I didn't know John, but I love you talking about Encircle and the safe place it is, and the needed place it is, and the incredible vision of Stephanie to have now 5 locations. And we'll put a link in our show notes to Encircle. Please check out the locations, their services. We'll put probably Encircle's social media in the show notes. Maybe Alex's Instagram account that I follow does great work there. Just so you can connect with Alex if you'd like to. But you're one of my new heroes, Alex.
Oh.
We didn't do a lot of prep for this podcast, and sometimes I'm just blown away by the spiritual maturity, the thoughtfulness, the grace, the discipleship, you joining the church, serving a mission, the courage to throw your parents 2 huge curveballs in your life. I'm Mormon, joined the LDS church, and I'm gay, and and just you still are close with your family. And we're recording this right before you and your husband are going to Brazil for the Christmas, New Year's break. And I'm excited for you. This podcast will probably be released while you're in Brazil. And I just think of how excited they are to have you come, and and this is what our church teaches, is strong families. So the fruits of Alex's life and Matt's life is strong families. They have a strong family. They have the chance to share their lives with each other. And that's beautiful. As we're aging up, my wife and I in our 60s, we're sharing more medical stuff with each other. And it's kind of fun to have a spouse to bounce things off with. And I'm just grateful for the institution of marriage, and I have a life partner. And I recognize the complexity of that. I have a life partner who can fully participate in the church, and it works for me and my wife. Obviously, we fit their heteronormative norm, and we fit the family proclamation. And I mourn that wonderful people in same-sex marriages don't have the same opportunity that I have to fully participate in the church. And that causes me anguish and dissonance. And I pray and hope for new directions one day in our church, while I'll continue to support and sustain our current leaders. And it's complicated for me. But I don't believe we're at the finish line, because there's so much pain for my queer friends. One of my queer friends in the podcast just talked about, I feel like I'm locked out of the house, and I looked in this house and there's all these straight couples just enjoying life. And I don't have the key to make that possible. The key that I have doesn't open up the door, but I still see their lives, and I don't know how to make that possible in my own life. And these stories, and they're heartbreaking. And sometimes visual imagery helps us understand that. So I pray for better days. We do have the family proclamation hanging up on our home, listeners, but I bring that up, and I've brought that up it doesn't answer the questions for queer people. It doesn't say how to live their life, just like you know well, Alex. So it can be pretty triggering. So it works really well for me and my wife and our straight kids, but it doesn't answer the questions. And so to just simplify it, says, Alex, read the family proclamation. Your life will be figured out. minimize the complexity of your road because you would love to make that work in your life. You almost got married, it sounds like, and you just authentically knew that I couldn't connect with the woman that way, and it wasn't fair to me and it wasn't fair to her. And so I hope we can develop more empathy and understanding. I hope as a church we can proactively give our members better tools so they know how to respond when someone comes out. We can better prepare parents that they're going to have queer kids. And this is how I wish we had these discussions at church, Alex. So parents were just taught by LDS parents had better tools and better perspective. And we're taught this isn't a choice and you can't unchoose it. And I could go on and on about all the things I wish we could do to improve the experience for queer people.
And can I say one thing about that piece, Richard, about the
Yes.
choice? And this is something that I really want to say to the parents, listening right now. A lot of times, maybe the kid will give an indication that they might be, queer, or they try and have a conversation come out, and then the parents never talk about it again because they feel like this is a choice. So talking about it, it's like putting that choice on the table for them, right? And here's the thing, like as part of the work that I do at Encircle, I have to sit with families that will share really difficult stories. And I sat with a parent, a mom, the other day, and she was telling me that her kid, her teenager kid, came out to her and they didn't talk about it again for many months or years because of this exact reason. She felt like talking about it would make her kid feel like that was a possibility, that was an option on the menu for them to choose in terms of a lifestyle, right? So what happened was this kid felt like they couldn't talk about it at home. They started talking about it with people that were probably not the right people. They did not have the support system at home. They started to self-medicate to the point that this kid eventually died of an overdose. And then when I talked to this parent and heard from them saying, when I saw my kid in the casket, lifeless, I just remember thinking like, all of the things that I was so worried about. I was so worried about what people in the ward were going to say if my kid came out and people knew. I was so worried about the members of the family, what they were going to think, that I am a bad parent, that, I wasn't obedient enough. I was so worried about all of these things before. But when I saw my kid in the casket, none of that mattered. None of it mattered. I wish that I would have just talked to them because now I understand that we have two choices. You can talk about it or you don't talk about it. But if you talk or if you don't talk about the experience of being queer with your kid, it's not going to change who they are because that is not a choice. The choice that you have is if you talk about it or not. And if you don't talk about it, this is the thing that could happen. You could end up losing your kid. And she said, I wish that I could put that feeling of looking at your kid and feeling like none of those things mattered into the hearts of all the parents, especially the LDS parents that have their kids alive in their home right now, so that they could talk and create a hospitable environment. Again, for what that I'm trying to say is if you're a parent and you're listening to this, talk about it, because not talking about it will not make it go away. It will only make it worse.
I agree with that, Alex. So super powerful. And I've shared this on the podcast a little bit, but we're empty nesters now. But if I would go back, I'd use Alex's advice and I'd actually get ahead of the curve and talk to my kids about not being what it means not to be. I'd probably frame it up as not being 100% heterosexual, just to make it really safe. And say that, certain percent of the population is not, and this is what it means. This would be age appropriate, 9, 10, 11. And say, if you feel you're not 100% heterosexual, this is how I respond as your dad or your mom. We want to walk with you on that road as you're aging up. And we want to have ongoing conversations about that. Because the premise in the back of my mind is different than it was 10 years ago, that having a queer kid is not a problem. It's not a bad outcome. It's a lot of LDS parents have taught me this, that they eventually come to the point where they're glad they have queer kids. And it's been a blessing to their family, to them, and they're grateful for this, even though it's been a journey. So I really agree with Alex. But if you're young, if you're parents and have younger kids, I think you can set just what Alex is doing and not wait till they come out. But just not thinking they're queer, but just, and going through a bunch of categories. If you cheat at school, or sextortion is another subject my son talks about as a therapist. Sextortion is, we could talk about that. But I would explain that to my kids and say, if you're being, this is what it is. This is how I respond if you're in the middle of a sextortion scheme, because you need, so that would be another example where because you talk about stuff proactively as a parent, you become a safe pot and the safe place. And the best parenting I've ever been as part of as a parent is where our kids are vulnerable to us and open up. But yeah, keeping the conversation going about being queer is like you teaching so many, Alex, is what I've been taught too, is people want to talk about. If you're a local leader and a kid comes out to you, it's a vulnerability. They may be wondering, and it usually is good if you keep the conversation going, or as the first conversation ends, establish the ground rules. Say, would you like me to proactively ask you about this? Do you want to talk about it once a week, once a month? I want to talk about as much as you do. Silence is, like you taught, Alex, is just going to create shame. So how can I support you and sort of set the ground rules going forward? That could be a friend, it could be a local leader, it could be a parent. Probably have time for just you to share one more segment, and then we could talk for another hour, but we probably better sign off.
Yeah, I think one thing that you mentioned, and I would wrap up with this in terms of like sharing your story and storytelling. There's so much healing that happens when you have the courage to share your story with other people. That's really what builds the relationship, who you really are. I have people that sometimes will come to me and ask, like, how do I let people know? Like, do I approach, like, do I tell them that I think that they're gay and that's okay? Like, what is the path? What do I do? And I usually say, like, the best thing that you can do is to create an environment where people feel like that is okay. How do you do that? Maybe when you introduce yourself, you use your pronouns. You say, my name's Alex. I use he, him pronouns, even though you're a heterosexual man. Maybe you have a pride flag in your living room in front of your house. Maybe you're watching a TV show and there's a scene with a gay character and people are saying something really mean about that gay character. And you're saying in front of your kids and family, like, it's unacceptable that somebody would treat a human being that way, just because they're being who they are. Like, good for them for being authentic and for being their whole selves. You're sending a message. And again, these kids are listening, they're watching things, they're observing you. And if you say all of these things that are affirming, that are loving, once they feel like they are at a point that they're comfortable talking about it without rushing them, they know that it doesn't matter what happens out there in the world. At home, they can be who they really are, and they can talk to mom and dad and to their siblings. And that's really what matters. That's the beauty of Encircle. Like, we want to get to these kids while they're still at home with their families. Like, in my mind, it's almost like they're trees and they're creating roots. And one day they will leave the house. They will go off to college, get married, whatever, But if they leave the house and the roots are not solid and deep and strong, then they leave and there's storms and it gets windy and they can bend and break. But if they have the tools, they have the love from their parents, from their family, then they can leave the house and it doesn't matter what people do or say. They know that they have that love. They know they have that support. They know who they really are and they love themselves. So I think that's the most important thing that we can do for ourselves, for our community, for our families, is to love unconditionally, and to understand that we don't have all the answers. And I think as long as we want to get it right and not be right, and we're curious and asking questions and really getting involved because we want to create this better, safer place for everybody so they can feel loved and they can feel the beautiful things that we see in them already, but they can feel it for themselves. That's really the most precious things that we can do.
Super powerful. Listeners, this is so grateful to have Alex Cutini on the podcast, spelled Cutini. And we will put in the show notes links to Encircle. Please check out Encircle. It's powerful. It's saving lives. They need donations. There's a link on there to donate. Takes a lot of money and a lot of resources to keep 5 homes open and provide all the services they do. Much of those services are free. So thank you, Alex, for being on the podcast. I'm so moved by your story. Matt, if you're listening, I'm glad you two found each other in this beautiful love story. I like to say that, Alex isn't the hero one day for being in the church and the villain next day for not. He's still a hero to me. And let's don't create heroes and villains, especially for our queer friends as they make their way forward. They're just heroes for being alive and moving forward in their life. And our job is to love, nurture. We're called to be gatherers, not sifters. And let's just love our queer people, friends, as they make their way forward and leave any judgment to our Savior. But I don't feel you just have all the fruits of your marriage and your ministry and your work is just saving lives and bringing hope. And I'm grateful for everything you're doing in every aspect of your life, Alex. So this is Richard Osler and Alex Cutini signing off another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.
Thank you, Richard. Pleasure to be with you.